Massively multiplayer online games. The title likely invokes images of basement-dwelling goblins with sweat-soaked graphic tees and hair drenched with Kentucky Fried Chicken levels of grease. But for my infantile pebble brain, this genre sounded like a dream. It's long been the fantasy of introverted, socially inept kids to escape into a world where instead of acne-covered preteen, they are NBA-sized, steroid-filled demigods slaying hordes of whatever the fuck the monster of the week happens to be. I, much like many young gamers who roamed the early internet, shared this same fantasy. Unfortunately, time and time again, my dreams of becoming a useless member of society have escaped me, and instead, I've been greeted with paywalls, boring and repetitive gameplay, and lackluster experiences. Today I'd like to rant and piss off as many people as possible by sharing my opinions on a genre I'm not at all well experienced with, at least if one were to examine the time I've sunk into these games. I'm hoping regardless, I can spark a discussion if a few people happen to stumble across this video. Feel free to comment and let me know if there's anything I'd missed, and I'd love to do a part 2 if I feel it's warranted. And without further ado, let's get into this train wreck. From a young age, I started with well-known titans of the industry: Club Penguin, Webkins, Wizard 101. Although these are far from MMOs in the traditional sense, they are in many ways baby's first experience in interactive chat rooms, much like what many first MMOs were intended to be: social experiences decorated in fun little activities and avatars to control. The main appeal of these types of baby games for me had to be that they were free, easy to sign up for, and presented in an E for everyone wrapping so that my mom would never realize how many secret girlfriends I had in my igloo. As an adolescent, I wasted an enormous amount of time effectively doing absolutely nothing but talking to people and walking around in these games, content to do the same thing over and over again for hours on end. And it was great, at least for the time. But at one point in elementary school, I vividly remember one of my friends telling me about World of Warcraft for the first time. He told me how his stepdad would constantly kick him off the computer to play, which was very important to me as he was my go-to partner to do the free content in Wizard 101 over and over again. And yes, I do mean over and over again. You can't progress into the next zones after level 12 without pain, so I was effectively hard-capped and stuck in the starting zone. And no, this surprisingly didn't become my friend's rant about how his stepdad was kind of a dick, but instead a beautifully told explanation of the world of Azeroth and all the amazing activities and stuff you could do in it. In my mind, it sounded better than kissing girls and holding hands, which I really had no experience with, but that's besides the point, because who needs girls when you have games? I rushed home that day to look up the game on my mom's old Dell desktop, only to discover that it cost money and that my dreams were effectively ruined. Now, this wouldn't be the end of my quest to fully immerse myself into an alternate reality, and as I became older and more socially awkward, this desire only grew stronger. But unfortunately, monetarily, I was still very much out of luck, so free-to-play games were my only option. Terra, Neverwinter, Vindictus, Dragon's Nest, Path of Exile, Guild Wars 2, Trove, Firefall, Arcade, Blade and Soul, Star Wars The Old Republic, Rift, Lineage 2, EverQuest, Old School RuneScape, RuneScape 3, the WoW Free Trial. If I really tried, I could probably think of more games, and in total I probably sunk at least 10 hours into them. Collectively. To be fair, I did play Trove for, a little while. Candy Barbarian, that's where it's at. But other than that, I really sunk almost no time into any of these games. Time and time again, I would find myself looking at a cool free MMO only to eventually delete it almost less than an hour after playing it. I'd say in almost every instance of this happening, I would spend significantly more time researching the game and its classes, or in the character customization than I would in the actual game. The recurrent theme I found in all of these games is that they did a great job of presenting and building a fantasy world for people to escape to, but consistently fell flat in key areas that make games fun. And I already know I have people in my comments ready to type out,
"Well, duh, you didn't buy any of these games, you just played the crappy free ones."
Yes, although you are entirely correct in saying this, I still feel now most of the time that the price seems to make little impact on how much I enjoy these games and if I feel they're polished. I mean, RuneScape is considered one, if not the best MMO ever made by a lot of people, and technically you can play a shit ton of content without dropping a cent, although there is paid content. RuneScape and the examples I mentioned earlier were all examples of games that I attempted to get into without forking up for money, but trust me, now that I'm older and I make slightly above minimum wage, I've tried to get into the paid ones too, and let me tell you, I have found a few I enjoy, but overall, I feel they tend to fall flat. But why didn't I like them? Well, unfortunately, that's a little bit more complicated answer. First, let's talk about gameplay. What makes a game? Well, for most people, at least. As discussed earlier, the main allure of many early MMOs were simply the ability to chat with people and to make social connections with nerds all around the world. For this reason, gameplay became kind of secondary. But obviously, as this feature became less and less impressive over the years, gameplay for many of these games grew to be extremely outdated, especially when compared to other genres. What's that? A balls-to-the-walls multiplayer action shooter that has insanely high skill ceiling and tons of replayability? Nah, Sorry man, I'll pass. I gotta finish up this quest collecting dried gum from Bobby Kotick's toilet so I can clear the cube crawl raid with my guild. As gaming has progressed, this issue has become more and more apparent. The turn-based RPG, or more specifically the JRPG genre, is the only other genre I know that its gameplay is also extremely outdated. But even with titles like Persona 5, Undertale, and the Final Fantasy series taking steps to innovate in the genre, it still baffles me that the MMORPG genre uses the same press button and stand still and charge a super flashy special move and move slightly to the right to avoid a big stop style of gameplay. I mean, we've seen attempts to make combat more interesting, especially with games like New World coming out, attempting to snag a bit of what makes games like Dark Souls fun, offering a more in-depth action-style combat system, and although I haven't played it myself, I've heard mixed things, and the player numbers unfortunately seem to reflect that. And yes, I'm aware there's probably other great games out there that innovate on this formula. I know that some isometric games like Lost Ark alleviate a lot of the problems I've listed, but overall, a huge issue still remains. It's almost a standard for the genre to have repetitive, mind-numbing, spam-filled styles of gameplay that lead to me frequently never experiencing an investment in most of the fights I've had in MMOs. And I feel the difficulty design of most MMOs tends to worsen this problem. Before I really dive deep into this section, I'd like to reiterate that I do not have much late-game experience with MMOs, and a lot of information regarding the late-game difficulty of a lot of the games I'll be talking about is coming secondhand from YouTubers, streamers, or other content creators out there. My opinion on a game's difficulty will be heavily biased, and in some cases might not be entirely accurate since it is secondhand knowledge, and my opinion may be swayed by other people's impressions, but I'll do my best to avoid this and make any corrections in the comment section or in editing. Just kidding. I will always spend the least amount of time on my videos as possible. No exceptions. Alright, so I believe that one thing that inevitably ties into the fun of gameplay is the difficulty. Every game developer struggles with striking the perfect balance of difficulty so that a game is not too frustrating, but is still engaging enough to keep players interested and feel that their decisions impact the outcome of a battle. And unfortunately, I feel that most MMOs just don't do this. Much of the early game content in most MMOs is mind-numbingly easy, to the point where developers know this and now incentivize using real money to skip past this boring-ass repetitive content. Real difficulty comes in the mental battle you are enduring to attempt to stay awake or avoid quitting the game when walking from area to area in an often pointlessly giant map, fetching random items and spamming the same attack over and over again with no risk of failure. This might not be too awful to get through, except that this doesn't just exist in the tutorial area of most of these games, but instead permeates the entire leveling experience, which can take tens to sometimes hundreds of hours, not to mention that if you make an alt character use a different class, you have to go through the same shit all over again. Almost designed to highly incentivize paying more money to fix an issue of poor gameplay design.
But what about late game content?
Well, you're right, late game content in these games can be difficult, especially for a newcomer to the genre, like me, but subjectively, this is not a fun type of difficulty. In games like Dark Souls, every mistake you make is recognized as a mistake you make, something you use to learn to take into the next round of a fight, and in those fights you're constantly making quick, in-the-moment decisions that could kill or help you finally beat the boss you've been stuck on for the past hour. This is of course with the idea that the gameplay doesn't bug out, but that's besides the point. In fighting games like Killer Instinct, one might struggle to learn move inputs or matchups, but with practice in the game, you'll slowly get better and recognize strategies and mind games your opponent might utilize, and instead use your own learned skills to counter and react to your opponent's moves. Every second against an opponent is spent analyzing what you can do and your opponent can do, until one guy inevitably ends up spamming the same move and hitting someone into the corner. My point is that every game has their own style of difficulty, whether it be difficulty in mastering movement, aiming, enemy attacks, battle formations, and strategies, and of course MMOs have some of these elements, but from everything I've seen and experienced, the difficulty doesn't usually lie here. I feel that in a lot of cases it lies in extremely predictable pre-planned positioning and skillless number checks to clear certain objectives in time. If that's your cup of tea, great, but for me personally I find it to be completely uninteresting. But again, fun is inherently subjective.
This is terrible.
There is also an aspect of difficulty in MMOs, unlike other genres, that require you to acquire a fundamentally hard skill called making friends. And for a genre that's built an audience on the foundation of those who favor antisocial internet isolation, this can definitely be pretty difficult to pull off. Nowadays, there's usually not this type of difficulties. You can just find random groups of useless baboons to team up with now, but many people who used to play the genre would argue this change has been made for the worse. Teaming up with people has always been important for endgame content like raids, which are typically content that usually comes available after sinking hundreds of hours into the game. Unfortunately, the culture surrounding MMOs means most public raids are meant to be learned and mastered to the point where you aren't reacting to scenarios being thrown at you in a fight, but instead going through a well-optimized pattern of positioning and spamming a few moves in a simple repetitive rotation, praying you do everything right as to not piss off some random guy still living in his mom's basement. It doesn't feel like it's designed to be a game, but rather like you're just repeating a process you were designed to copy. With the rise of platforms like YouTube, which feature a plethora of tutorials, that's essentially what it's become, taking away a valuable element of learning to fight for yourself for the cost of less frustration. And of course, yeah, one could easily bring up the fact that you can look up a gameplay tutorial for any game out there, and you're technically right, the argument can be made for a lot of games. Hell, I could say that Dark Souls is the exact same way. I mean, there's a shit ton of Dark Souls tutorials out there, right? Well, yeah, there is, but MMOs tend to lack the same room for individual error in my opinion, simply based on their flowchart-like combat rotation formula. Not only that, but based on the fundamental co-op nature of boss fights and raids in MMOs, because most of the pressure won't be on you, the fights will likely not share the same level of tension, with most of the difficulty of these fights coming from making sure your group is not full of idiots so they can clear the content. And whether you're the idiot or the Reddit moderator maxed out mage cackerel, this in my opinion lacks the great feeling of accomplishment other genres can give you. And if we're talking real difficulty, how about the difficulty of earning enough money to pay for the best items in most of these games? I contemplated for a while about actually writing out my criticisms about the horrid monetization of MMOs as a whole, because if you're familiar with the genre, you already know. But for those who don't, it's about as bad as you'd expect. Ever since companies have found out they can publish a game as free to play and earn more money through long-term cash shop-centric business models, player experience has been on the decline. But let me tell you, that private yacht business has been booming. Now, cash shops aren't inherently bad, although, to be honest, I'd probably struggle to find an example of one that isn't bad. But just to be safe, in around 99% of instances, I feel that implementation of these shops actively work to worsen a player's experience. Cosmetic items devalue the accomplishment of many earnable in-game items. Convenience items are just pay to win and work to undo purposely bad game design. And of course, pay to win, power buff, stat items are, well, pay to win. Not much elaboration there needed. Point is, if you can just pay to earn the best rewards, what's really the point in playing the game? This script was originally written a whole 10 months ago, before I had any subscribers, before this channel was even called Noot. Since then, I've gone out of my way to try a few MMOs and have been pleasantly surprised. Although they don't have the best combat, the best systems, all of that, I've been enjoying playing OSRS and Classic Wrath of the Lich King. Classic Wrath has probably been the most enjoyable for myself recently. The experience helps substantially by leveling with some of my friends. I still believe that a lot of my arguments stand, otherwise I wouldn't have published this video, but I can understand where the appeal comes in. As iterated earlier, MMOs were built to be social experiences and in my opinion shine the most from these player interactions. However, unlike the past, this isn't something that's limited to MMOs. Great social or co-op experiences can be had with any genre, meaning the marketability of something like this is inherently less impactful. So I'd love to see some expansion of these style of co-op systems that offer something unique to the genre, making them a go-to social player experience. When it comes to my other hopes for MMOs, I'm definitely looking forward to future releases with titles like Ashes of Creation still looking to be the dream that hopeful MMO players have been waiting for, constantly on the horizon, but still out of reach. Overall, I don't know. I'm hoping some good stuff comes out before I have to be an adult and contribute to society full time, but currently, looks like I won't be able to sit in my mom's basement for much longer. At this point, I think most people are just better off venturing to other genres of games, and for this reason, I don't think MMOs will ever be the titans of the game industry they used to be. But I'd love to be wrong. Again, I'd like to reiterate how thankful I am for you guys giving this video a watch. I'm interested to see some feedback and hear what you guys have to think. If you don't mind, I'd like to do a little self-promo to let you know I've set up a Patreon, so if you have the spare funds to support the channel, it's there. I'm still figuring out what unique rewards I want to offer, but so far I'm thinking I'd just offer it pretty cheap, and I can just throw your guys' names at the end of the video if that's alright. Maybe I can put up some of my outtakes, or set up a Discord, I don't know. If you have any suggestions, just let me know. However, I really want to emphasize though, I already have a job, so please do not feel obligated to give me money in any way, shape, or form. Your support by just watching my content already means the world to me. Here's to hoping I'll see you in the next video, and hoping that one day, the right game, I'll finally be able to merge together with my gaming chair to become a horrific, sleep-deprived eldritch entity. But until that fateful day, I guess I'll just keep pretending to be an e-girl in populated cities for free gold. Take care.